everyone, welcome to a new reading vlog. So this one is starting on February 21st. When will it end? Nobody knows. That's how these go. But I wanted to give you guys an update on what I have been reading, then reading plans, I guess, that I have, which will forever change. This is the most fitting sweatshirt ever. This is a Moody Readers Club, reading whatever I feel like, because that's how I read books. So, to catch you guys up to where I am, I don't have much of an update because this past week has been the release of A Court of Silver Flames. So that is what I was reading for, like, many days. I read that in one day, but I did a reread of Akamath, Akawar, Akafas, and then straight into Akasif, I guess is what we're calling it now. That, I don't know. Okay, I don't know what I'm gonna do as far as content for that goes, because I want to reread it because I have my physical copies now. They're up there. Do you see how exciting they are? Yeah, I got a lot of versions. This is the only book that I ordered multiple copies of this year, and I'm gonna hold myself to that. I finally got my physical copy, so I think I want to go through and read it physically the second time through and tab stuff so that I can actually do like a full... I don't know if I want to do a review or just like a reading vlog, but I've already read it, so it's not going to be like a first impressions. I haven't decided what I want to do yet, but the entire past week has been reading everything in Prithian. That's just where my head has been, which I think I'm going to do like a separate video. I don't need to update you guys here. So that is kind of what this past week has been, but I have started other stuff. I did read Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed with the Page Turners Book Club, which is my book club over on Facebook. We read this as like the main book, and we are about to start the romance book this week, starting tomorrow. So this will be talked about in this vlog. But this one I want to talk about here just because I wasn't vlogging over the course of reading it, and I picked a bad week to schedule a book because it was Court of Silver Flames release week. That was poor planning on my part. But I did read this, and I did chat with all of you guys. So this is a heavy little story. This basically follows a white mother and her kids and her husband who have a black nanny. And the story kind of kicks off with the initial scene of this black nanny being pulled aside in a grocery store and being accused of like kidnapping this white child that she is babysitting because people thought she looked suspicious, and she just happened to be the nanny for it, and it was kind of controversial. That's kind of like the kickoff scene, but basically we get to kind of get inside the heads of her, of Alex, the white mother, and Amira, who is our main character, the nanny, and her boyfriend that she starts seeing, who are all interconnected in certain ways. And it's basically a story that kind of really shines the spotlight on what being a white ally is in the negative sense, and how a lot of people use being an ally as a like self-serving thing. It's very showcasey. It's a lot of like, look what I'm doing, not actually like caring about what you're doing. It's all about image and how everything is perceived. So it's one of those books where like if it didn't hit you and it didn't make you start thinking about your own actions, the book was for you. And it was a pretty eye-opening story. It's a very short story, but I feel like so much was accomplished within this very short thing. And I gave it 4 stars. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think if it had been longer and it had been fleshed out more, I feel like I would have bumped it up to 5 stars because I feel like it would have hit a lot harder. But I honestly think being as short as it was and being as blunt as it was perfect for the type of story. Like, I think the writing was perfect for what the story needed to be. So, I read that, gave that 4 stars, thoroughly enjoyed that reading experience. I am currently reading the new Kristen Hanna book, The Four Winds. I'm like in the middle, maybe a little bit further of it. Let me check. I'm listening to it right now because I don't own a physical copy, so got this one from my library. I am 62% of the way in. And I haven't read much Kristen Hanna, but the ones that I have read of hers, are they all this heavy? Because I feel like she writes a lot of just kind of historical, just dark frickin' stories where she like really gets into the nitty gritty of how hard life was in this specific setting at this specific time, because I feel like a lot of us have like a general idea of what like the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression were like. She's like, no, this is what it was actually like, and you were on page living through it with these characters for a long period of time. And I remember feeling that way about The Great Alone, just on how hard life was in like the 70s up in Alaska when you have nobody and nothing to really help you except for your abusive family. And that one was rough as well. So her writing is just fan-freaking-tastic, though. I'm not, like, the biggest Kristen Hanna fangirl, but I kind of am starting to understand why people will always pick up her books when they come out, why they're always bestsellers, because she can put anybody in the mindset of her characters. Like, she's just really good at writing you into the story, so that there's really no, like, nuance onto, like, how to interpret anything. It's just raw and dirty and realistic, and it's rough. So I am 62% of the way into that. I'm probably going to finish that at work tonight. And it's one of those books where it really makes you appreciate everything that you have, because these people are living with the bare minimum and barely making it by. And when you're like deep into this book, it's one of those moments where like when you come back out and you're like, I have electricity, I have running water, I have food in my pantry, and you just want to like go hug all of these things that you're taking for granted because you're reading about characters who are living in a tent and not having water to bathe and like had to do this to like keep your family alive, and you were killing yourself to make 50 cents a day picking cotton in a field. And I was just like, oh my god, life was so hard. But it's an interesting time to release a story because it's about the Great Depression and the economy collapsing, the extreme climate issues, and just a lot of things that are paralleling very well with 2020 and 2021, and things that were going not to like the scale that this book is, because obviously this is a very different time period and priorities were very different, so we're very privileged for what we're going through, but it's a very interesting time to release this book because this is kind of this generation's version of that. And while it's not nearly as hard, it's kind of putting a lot of things in perspective for people who are just really struggling through this pandemic. So it's an interesting release time for the story, so I'm liking that so far. Still in the middle of Sword of Kaigen. I should probably finish that too. If I have time tonight, I will probably pick that back up, because I still have like 3 hours left of that audiobook. I am about to start Take a Hint, Danny Brown tomorrow. This is the romance book that we're reading for February, and I'm so excited. I love Talia Hibbert. She is like one of my top tier romance authors that I always am impressed by. Like, every one of her books that I've read so far has been amazing, so I have the utmost faith in this book being amazing. So that's what I'm picking up starting tomorrow with my book club, and I think that's it for this check-in. I think that's all I have for you guys as of right now. So update for the books that I talked about last. I have since finished The Four Winds by Kristen Hanna. I gave it 5 stars. I didn't actually expect to give it 5 stars just because it's a hard book to read. But this book reminded me so much of a combination of The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, in that Elsa, the main character in this book, reads like a real person. Like, when the book finished, I wanted to Google her and look into her life history and see what she looked like, and it felt so real to me and so authentic to like history that she feels like a real person. So it feels like a combination of that and a Kristen Hanna book. Okay, I haven't read that many Kristen Hanna books, and I understand why she is a best-selling author. Like, her books are so intensely gripping and so character-driven. It's like, it's a lot. But her books are so bleak and dismal. Like, she really picks a time period and like a character and then just puts them through the ringer. Like, the worst things that have happened in history, she's like, I want to write about that, and I want to write about somebody who lived through it. And they're rough reads, man. They're exhausting to read. So it feels like a combination of Taylor Jenkins Reid and Kristen Hanna, which is fitting because it's Kristen Hanna. But if you guys, I don't know if this is in like a physical book, but in the audiobook version that I got from my library, there's an interview with the author and the narrator at the end of it, which kind of was really interesting to listen to after finishing such a grueling story. And she basically talked about how she picks her stories. Like she picks, like she just kind of wanted to pick a time period, which was like the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. But what we hear about that in history is misogynistic things. All of the accounts of history from that are written from a man's perspective because that's the time period that it was in. And she basically wanted to write the story of a woman who went through that because a lot of what this country was built on was women labor. And it was so cool to see how backbreaking and how grueling, I guess is the word I used before, but that's a very fitting word for the time period it was to not only go through the Great Depression and that whole time period, but go through it as a woman. So you already have other things that are holding you down and other things that lose respect for you that you can't control on top of a really, really crappy time in history. So it was really cool. And the author's note was really cool. So I gave that 5 stars. Didn't expect to give it 5 stars, but oh my god, sitting on that book after finishing it, I'm still thinking about it. And the characters still feel so real to me that I feel like I need to like look them up. But they don't exist. But like people like that existed. So whenever an author can get me so interested in a time period that I knew nothing about and I didn't really have any desire to learn about, and I'm like, wow, now I'm interested in the Great Depression, which is not something that I feel I knew too much about, like from my education in school. So I read that, and then I also finished The Sword of Kaigen, and I gave that 5 stars too. I was nervous about this because I've set it down, and I'm not a good person at putting a book down and then picking it back up. Generally, if I put a book down, it's likely going to be a DNF. It's a very rare occurrence that I want to go back to a book that wasn't holding my attention. I am completely a mood reader, which can kind of make that a little weird, but I really wanted to finish this because I really, really enjoyed the first 3/4 of it that I read before I stopped to read other things. So I finally finished it, and oh my god, it was incredible. Like, it's the book hangover you get from this. It's a standalone, which is crippling to me. It was so exciting to me to read a standalone fantasy because that is so rare and they don't exist in this day and age, but this one does. But I don't want it to be a standalone, and it makes me mad because I just want to appreciate the story for what it is, but I feel like I got introduced to so much in this world. Like, I learned, by the end of it, I feel like I had a good grasp of, like, how the magic system worked, how the politics work, how the different factions of society were broken down, and we finally saw, like, an uprising and a changing of the tide, and then the book just ended, and I was like, oh, darn it. So it was incredible. If you like the Poppy War, I highly recommend this because it has a very similar Asian historical vibe to it, mixed in with fantasy. But it's not as harrowing as the Poppy War. Like, it's not as graphic, but it's still heavy. Like, it's still a war-torn country type of story. So there is still death, and there still is, like, emotions and war and graphic violence and stuff, but it's not nearly to the scale that the Poppy War is. But I feel like it just left me with an equal size hangover that the Poppy War trilogy did to me. So I loved it. It ripped my heart out, and I'm here grieving. But it was amazing. I loved it. Thank you, book, for giving me that horrible experience. It was so good. Highly recommend it. Okay, and I needed some palate cleansers because both of those books were incredibly depressing stories, but god, they were so good. So fortunately, the timing worked out really well that we are starting the romance read for the Page Turns Book Club, which is my Facebook book group. And that's a Talia Hibbert book, which means it's just going to be amazing and fun and happy, and that's just what this is. So I'm filming this on Tuesday, which means I have just finished the second section, which means I am this far. I'm almost halfway into the book. And her books are so freaking good. She writes really light, happy, rom-com type stories, but she manages to weave in really, like, untold modern society issues flawlessly. Like, I feel like her and Kennedy Ryan are the two authors that just really hit modern romance on the head, and they also tackle, like, societal issues without it feeling overbearing, without it stealing the balance of, like, the relationship from the story. And Kennedy Ryan does it in a much heavier manner. Like, her stories are a lot more emotional. Her stories have a lot more crying in them, and I feel like Talia Hibbert does it on like a lighter scale. So depending on like what type of story you want, both of these authors I'm going to recommend. So this one, we're obviously going to be dealing with an interracial couple. Our male lead is Pakistani and Muslim, but he's not practicing. And Danny is a black woman who is in her PhD program, so like woman in STEM, and it's amazing. And so far, I'm seeing that we're gonna have anxiety rep, which has like my radar pinging because that's me. I've got that. And from what I've read of Hibbert so far, all of her representation, whether it's own voices or not, is thoroughly researched and extremely well represented. So that was redundant. I said representation is represented well. But you know what I'm saying. So far I haven't seen too much of it yet, but I'm excited to see how she does it. So like I said, I'm only on the second day, so I'm 9 chapters in as I'm filming this, and I'm loving it so much. So this is a good palate cleanser after the bleak and dismal books that I was reading earlier this week. And I also listened to Book Boyfriend by Clara Kingsley. This is a book I've had on my shelf for a really long time. My friend recommended it to me, so I picked it up. This, I can take the bookmark out because we've since finished it. This one, I think I'm going to give it 3 stars. This is the cutest, cheesiest, most fantasy romance. And okay, fantasy as in like what you would fantasize in real life about, not actual fantasy. This is very much contemporary. But this is basically the fantasy that all book nerds have in finding a book boyfriend. This is a story about a girl who is a book blogger, who is somewhat anonymous online, but everybody knows her. She's a really big book reviewer in the romance world. And it's basically her relationship with a guy that she meets at a book signing, who actually is a romance writer under a woman's pen name. And she doesn't know this, he kind of figures it out, and it's a very short story, but it's just all of the quintessential book nerd romantic fantasies that we all have of like a guy buying us books instead of buying us drinks, and it's adorable, but it's also one of those books where like if they just communicated, this book wouldn't have needed to exist. I don't necessarily love books that the obstacle that's preventing them from living happily ever after is just if they had freaking talked. So this is one of those situations where we're seeing both perspectives. We're reading from both his and her perspectives, and we know that he knows who she is and that he needs to come clean at some point, but he just keeps putting it off and putting it off. And as a reader, you're just sitting there knowing that it's just going to get worse and worse the longer that he doesn't tell her who he is. And just have a conversation, people. Why is it so hard? But it was so cute, and honestly, the ending was so swoony. So if you're looking for like a really cute, fairly cheesy, I'm gonna call this a rom-com too because it was pretty entertaining. She has a cat named Fabio. That was entertaining to me. It doesn't take itself too seriously. I'm gonna recommend this. I gave it 3 stars. I think I am gonna read the rest of the series because there's obviously characters introduced that I know are gonna get their own story. So this was highly enjoyable and a very good, happy little story to read after like the harrowing things that I was reading earlier this week. So that's where I am with my reading. That's my update as of right now, and I will check in later on this week to let you guys know my final thoughts on Dani Brown and what else I've picked up since then. Alrighty, it is Sunday now. We have rounded out the week, and I've got updates. This is going to be a long reading vlog because I apparently read a lot this week and that I really want to talk to you guys about. We started out in a really dismal state with really dark books that I was reading, and I'm going to round it out with a whole bunch of romance. I hope you're ready. So I have since finished Dani Brown, Take a Hint, Dani Brown by Talia Hibbert, and loved it. I think I like this more than Get a Life, Chloe Brown. I think this is my favorite one so far of the Brown Sisters trilogy, and I'm so excited to read Eve's story because she's the next one, and I think that's coming out very soon. I can't even explain how well Talia Hibbert just incorporates so many things into such a fun little story without it feeling overbearing, without it feeling heavy-handed, keeping it light and happy and incredibly sexy. Like, I feel like she just has the perfect balance of, like, funny, witty one-liners and interesting issues that we need to discuss in all of her books. They're all different issues, and I feel like everybody is going to be represented in her book at some point in time, whether that is with like mental health things, or racial issues, or sexuality issues, or religion. Like everything is touched on in her books. This one specifically, we discussed like a black woman in STEM who is like a workaholic, needs to learn how to like chill, but also practices witchcraft. And we also have a Pakistani man who's not really a practicing Muslim anymore, but is having issues with anxiety because of past grief issues, and he plays on a rugby team, and how his public image was affected by the thing that the grief dealt with. There's just like so much in this that we get introduced to, and I feel like you have a full perspective on, but then you also just get a really awesome romance with really realistic people with real body types and real sex scenes that are still incredibly sexy, but like they feel real and authentic. I don't know. This Talia Hibbert and County Ryan are like just sitting pretty at the top of my romance author recommendation list forever, apparently. So love this story a lot. Thank you to everybody who read it with me. Then I took a turn down a smuttier avenue for the remaining days of the week. So I read a book that has been recommended to me approximately 18 million times, and that is Fighting Destiny by Amelia Hutchins. This is the first book in the Fae Chronicles series. This is a book that is very commonly recommended to people who just love fairy porn. Mainly people who are fans of the ACOTAR series and are really just looking for a similar vibe, but more adult. And we kind of got that with Silver Flames. Look at it, it's on the shelf now. It looks so pretty. But this one took a turn. Wowzers. So, okay, how do I talk about this book appropriately? First, I'm gonna say that dark romance is a thing that exists in the romance world. It is like a subgenre of the romance world, and it focuses mainly on really controversial and taboo relationships. That is not to say that if you read these things and you like those stories, that you yourself are problematic. There's a reason why romance exists, because it's like a fantasy type of situation that you can live out in a very safe and healthy manner. That's my perspective on dark romance. It does not mean that you would like to be kidnapped and raped at gunpoint. It does not mean that you're fantasizing about your best friend's father. It just means that you kind of get to live through those unrealistic fantasies in a healthy way in a book. Okay, I might make a whole video about that. This is, in my opinion, going to fall in the dark romance category, but it's also fantasy romance. It's a fae story. And it really, really delves into the concept that fae are not the romanticized characters that we have written them into books as. Fae are really problematic creatures at like their ultimate core of like the lore of what fae and fairies are. Like they're troublemakers and they revel in the idea of like tormenting humans. So this basically took that concept and turned it sexy. So the fae's power in this world is that they can over-arouse you and make you do anything possible to have sex with them. Like their mind control powers are basically to overpower you and make them overly enticing to the point where you're willing to do literally anything for them to touch you and to please you. And it's a whole thing. So keep that in mind if you go into the story. It's going to feel extremely rapey. I hate that word, but I feel like that's what was just playing in my mind at the beginning of this until you kind of start to understand what the world is like. That is not excusing it in any way, and I'm going to reiterate the fact that I do not think this is a healthy relationship, and that's the concept here. So we're following kind of an urban fantasy type feel where fae exist, vampires exist, shifters kind of exist, and witches exist. And our main female lead is working in this coven as kind of like an investigator. It gave me Criminal Minds feels, which I'm loving. I'm actually binging through Criminal Minds as we speak. So there was a lot of like crime scene investigation mixed with like really erotic, sexy time fae things. It was a good combination for me this week, let me tell you. So it follows her as she's in this coven. She gets called in and gets hired by like this dark prince of the Fae to investigate these murders that are happening. And she basically gets like bound to him, and there is sexual tension aplenty between them. And it's not just like hinted at subtly like most sexual tension is. It's like on page, she's like, wow, I want to jump his bones. And he's like, I know you do. It's because I'm Fae, and I just bring this out on you. So it's kind of setting up the world for like this whole series. I've only read the first book. I gave it 3 stars. It was incredibly sexy, but incredibly problematic, which you were aware of the whole time. And it was kind of interesting how the world was introduced, because it's not a super long story, but I feel like I got a good grasp of like all of the creatures and how they all interact and how the world works and all of the things. So that was my rant on that. Man, I'm talking a lot in this video. I apologize. Okay, so I read that. Okay, let's see. Next, I also read this entire book yesterday. I was so invested in this story, guys. This is one of my favorite romances that I've read in recent years, and that's saying something. So I read Rachel Lynn Solomon back when she was a YA author. She wrote the You'll Miss Me When I'm Gone story about the sisters and the genetic disease. She wrote really hard-hitting YA contemporary, and I'm always like kind of skeptical when authors branch into the adult world, specifically into the romance world. She did this so well. This is a book that's been getting a lot of buzz recently, specifically in the romance world, and it was so good. So this basically follows 2 like radio hosts on essentially like an NPR type of system, like a public broadcast radio, who are kind of like fighting to stay in the field in like the dying age of radio. And they come out with the concept of the X Talk, which is a talk show where they interview exes and they really discuss about how relationships work, why these 2 people didn't work well together but are still friends. And it's a fake dating trope, but kind of not really, because they kind of go into the show with their boss telling them that we need to tell people that you guys are exes. That's why you have the grounds to talk about this concept on your show. So we kind of have like a fake dating but have already broken up trope, but they're starting to fall for each other while they're working on this show. And it was so good. It was so, like, the main characters are Shay and Dom, like Dominic, and I love them. Like, Dom is one of my favorite new male leads that I've read in a really long time. He has kind of anxiety issues, like public speaking issues, and their relationship was just developed so well. The pacing was phenomenal in this book. We also have all of like my favorite tropes. Like, I love fake dating tropes. Those are always super fun. They're also kind of enemies to lovers because they hate each other at the beginning of this. We have the, oh no, there's only one bed scene in this, which is like one of my favorites. It's so good. I loved this. I think the ending was a little messy and a little chaotic, but I mean, that's real life. So I'm sitting at 4 stars with this. I honestly might bump it up to 5. I loved it that much. I read the whole thing in one day. It's so good. So read this book. It's so good. It is currently the last day of February, and I'd really just want to round out this month by reading my favorite Black author, which is Kennedy Ryan. This is a book that I know is going to shock you guys that I haven't read it yet, but I kind of was just saving it because I'm like almost out of Kennedy Ryan books, and she is just top tier for me. So I've been saving this for a rainy day, which is fitting because it's literally just sleeting outside right now. But I started this last night and I'm going to finish it tonight. I am halfway through at this point, and oh god, her books are just so stinking good. This is technically All the King's Men #3, or the King's Duet. What is that one called? All the King's Men, I think. The Kingmaker and Rebel King are like a duology, and this is kind of like a spin-off story of one of the side characters, and I love it so much. It is confusing to me because Jacoby Diem is the narrator for Ezra, which is the male lead in this, and he is the narrator for Grip, and he will literally always be Grip in my mind because I've listened to Grip and Still so many times, so anytime I hear his voice come on, I'm like, oh hey Grip, how's it going? So it's a little weird to switch to another Kennedy Ryan male lead with the same narrator, so that is a thing. But it is available on the Audible, whatever, they got rid of the Audible Escape thing, and now it's like the Plus catalog, which is like, it's not nearly as good. But this is available all of a sudden in it. It's included in that. So I will probably finish out my thoughts on this at the start of like the next reading vlog, but it's gonna be a 5-star read. I don't think I've given any of her books less than 5 stars. So this is what I'm currently working on, and that's where I'm gonna end this vlog that is very long. So we started out in a really depressing state, and now we're ending on a whole bunch of smut, and it's just been a glorious week. So thank you guys for coming along with me on this reading vlog, and I'll see you guys in my next one.